Hello. I'm going to do a video. I've got a lot of input on my videos I've done so far, and I decided to backtrack and go through my childhood. I was raised in an alcoholic home with an alcoholic mother, and my dad was there. They struggled. They were divorced and moved back in together, and they tried the best they could. And my mom always went to work and did the best that she could from how she was raised. I've always found that addiction is a family disease, that it goes from one generation to the next to the next. And so I had a pretty rough childhood. And the topic I'm going to talk about is a little hard to hear, but it's what shaped and formed me to what I was and the trust issues I have. When I was in elementary school, I used to go to this thrift shop, and I used to shop, and I'd get a bag of clothes for like $1.50 or something on a certain day on the weekend. And one weekend I had went there, and it looked like the shop was closed, and I knocked on the door, thought maybe they just weren't open yet, and an older gentleman came to the door and asked me what I was doing, and I said I was looking for the the store that wanted to do the bag shopping and fill the bag for, the $1.50. And so he acted surprised and kept telling me that I looked like his granddaughter and to come on in and fill my bag. And so I did, and I went through and I shopped, and I kept noticing him watching me, telling me how much I look like his granddaughter, and he seemed so excited by that fact. When it came time to pay, he asked if he could show me a picture of his granddaughter that he had in the back room. And I was a very naive little girl at that point. And elementary school, I had bib overalls on and a winter coat. And I ended up, through his enthusiasm of wanting to show me so bad this picture of his granddaughter, I ended up going in the back room. And there, I seen that there was like a twin mattress back there. And he pretended like he was looking for a minute and then kept telling me that I must be getting warm. And he was trying to get my coat off of me. And then finally he tried kissing me, open tongue and mouth, and I could smell alcohol in his breath, and he kept trying to grab me and pull at my bib overalls and get that coat off. And so we had quite the struggle, and I ended up slipping out of the coat, and he got my bib overalls and got the top of it, and I pulled away from him as hard as I could, and I took off running. At that point, I made it back home, and I left the bag of clothes, and all I could think of was I was never going to return to that place again, ever. And my mother was furious with me every single time she asked me where my new winter coat was. I froze. I couldn't even answer the question, and she would get madder and madder at me, saying, wasn't it cold? Where were you? You don't remember where your coat was? And all the questions would spin my head. My head would just start spinning uncontrollably, and I didn't know how to answer the question even. I was afraid of the anger that she had right at that minute from me losing my coat, that if she knew what happened, that she'd be mad at me for what happened with that guy, and that somehow it was my fault that I lost my coat. So I knew just not to say anything. I was just afraid. I didn't know. And I was young. I was just in elementary school. And then by the time I was 14, 15, we had moved in different houses, and we started getting prank phone calls. If my dad would answer the phone, there would be a hang up and a click immediately. If my mom would answer, there would be a voice just saying, I don't even know what they said to her. I just know that she would always complain of the guy talking in that voice. And finally, one day he changed the topic to things he was going to do to me once he got a hold of me in a sexual nature. And it scared the bejeebies out of her. and ended up that she went to the police station, and the police said that there was nothing that could be done because back in them days, you had a phone and it was attached to the wall, and you had to walk over to the phone with the cord and you hung it up. And if somebody was saying something you didn't want to hear, you hung it up. And there was no caller ID back then, so there was no way to know who the voice was on the end of the phone. And we even moved to different houses as a family, and the phone calls still kept coming. I remember, my parents were protective when they started happening. When he would say things, that they would clamp down on me, and it would make it to where I wasn't able to stay out late, or I had to be home at this time, and I was always having to check in, and it was like my freedom was being taken away, and I couldn't even understand why. If I would answer the phone, I would just hear I don't know, there was some kind of muffled, it was like he was talking through something. I can still hear the voice in my head to this day, but I wasn't afraid of it at the moment. So when I turned 18, my best friend and I got our first apartment, and I was silly enough to not realize that I was an adult, and I signed a lease without telling my parents that I had done that. And we moved into our first party house, and it was our apartment, and we thought we were so grown and so independent. And you know what? At 18, you think you are absolutely invincible, that nothing is going to happen to you. You think that everything bad just seems to happen to everybody else. It's not going to happen to you. So we thought we were grown and working and paying the bills, and Christmas came, and I was home Christmas Eve night at my mother's. And she'd been dealing with some things, footsteps in the snow up to her bedroom window, plant knocked over outside, that she knew that somebody was out and about. And the phone calls started. And I'm 18 years old, and I answer the phone on Christmas Eve. And at my apartment, through a party one night, somebody had broke out the back door window, the top window. And we took a piece of cardboard and put up there with some duct tape all the way around it, and till maintenance could fix it. And I'm at my mom's that Christmas Eve, and I heard the voice on the end of the phone start talking. And by that time, I feel like, I got this. I can handle it. And I tell him, you know what? You don't even know where I live. This is my mom's house. I don't even live here. And he proceeds to tell me that, I know, Kelly, you live in the apartment above the electric company, and you really need to fix that back bedroom window. And started telling me things that was in my bedroom. And I was so scared and angry at the same time that someone had violated me in that way. And I hung up the phone, and I didn't tell my mom because I knew that I wouldn't be allowed to go back to my apartment, that she would completely freak out again. And again, I thought I could handle it. I slept with a butcher knife. I was going to handle anybody that was going to break in and come after me, because I don't know. I was scared, but I wanted to be an adult and wanted to be free. And I was tired of the years of dealing with the things that I had. And I just wanted to be an adult. So I ended up moving to North Carolina when I was 19. And it was a good break for me to be able to move there, and a change of scenery and no phone calls. And I was in a relationship there, and the relationship fell through, and I ended up coming back home. And I went to my grandmother's to stay. My grandmother had always been a strong support in my life, and I think it was like my second day back. So I'm jet lagged and tired and emotionally drained, and someone knocked on the door, and she answered it, and they asked for me. And I went to the door, and it was a guy, and he asked if my mother was around. And sorry, I'm having vocal issues today. I have something going on with my throat. He asked if my mom was home. And my mom had been out of town that weekend, and he said that he had a car that he wanted me to look at for my mom. I was like, I don't know anything about cars. How would I know what my mom would want? And he said, you can at least come with me, look at the car, look at the make, look at the model. He said, look at the color, see if it's something you could see your mom in. If not, I have another guy that wants it this weekend. I'm going to go ahead and sell it to him. If you come with me and tell me that you think your mom would like the looks of this car, I'll hold the car. Well, this is how naive I am. I'm 19, not thinking a thing about it. I go in the kitchen and tell my grandma, hey, I'm going to go look at a car. So I hop in the vehicle with him and we start driving. He said it wasn't too far away. And we started driving out towards the country. And we kept driving, and it's dusk out. It's starting to get dark. And I kept saying, how much further till we get to this car? How much further? And he keeps asking questions about where I've been, what I've been doing. And next thing you know, we get to a certain point in the road, and I'm like, you need to turn back around. I just need to go. My grandmother's going to be worried about me. I thought we were just going around the block. And he started talking in that voice. And then instantly, everything started spinning for me. I went back into a state of almost panic. I knew instantly who I was in the car with, and I knew that he meant harm to me. He turned off the side of the road, and I kept looking at the door, and I kept thinking, I'm just going to jump out. And he had it to where I couldn't open the door. And he pulled in the country and towards the woods, and he pushed a button that made the seat go back all the way. So he had this planned for quite a while, and the minute he tried climbing on top of me and trying to do things to me, I started punching him. And the harder I punched and tried to scratch and hurt him, the more he hurt me. And he ended up hurting me, and he ended up raping me violently. And the more and more I cried, the more he laughed in that horrible, horrible voice that I couldn't stand. And once he was finished, once he had got off, he started crying. And then I was scared. I'd seen enough shows to know how this one was going to end, and I could tell that by his fear, and he just couldn't quit crying. And I started thinking, and I'm like, listen, you just caught me off guard. I just went through a breakup. Why didn't you ask me out? And I told him I wasn't going to tell no one, and I just kept talking, and I was calm. And he finally calmed down and kept asking, you're not going to tell, you're not going to tell. And he's the one that told me that he had worked in a factory with my mom, and I had to have been about 12, 13 years old, and he had found where my mom lived and drove by our house then and seen me outside playing with a ball. How scary is that this man had been watching me grow up in my hometown and watching me play. He told me about my aunt and uncle's house, and that he would see me in the yard there. And he always kept tabs on me and sat back and waited like a predator until the right time to be able to catch me off guard. And I thought about all the phone calls, and I just kept telling him, if you can just get me back home, then I will never tell this story ever. And he did take me home, and my grandmother had left and went to the grocery store or something. She wasn't there, and I was so sick. I was sore. I was hurting. I was embarrassed. I was everything. And I made my way to the bathroom, and she had a big claw tub that was deep, and I filled it with the most scalding hot water that I could get, and I started submerging myself in that bath. And my grandmother came home, and I couldn't even hardly leave the bathtub. And with my family knowing that there was somebody doing that, while I laid there in that bath, and I kept thinking of everything, my mom's temper, my grandmother's, everything, my dad, even my brothers. I kept thinking that somebody's going to go to jail, and it probably won't be the right person. And I just had too much alone time at that moment to think. And how could I explain to the police that I knew I had a stalker? I knew that there was something wrong, but yet I chose to get in a car willingly. Who does that? Somebody who's stupid. Um, Gosh, I was 19 years old and I'm 53, and that changed the course of my life forever. Um, Gosh, you never forget. And he didn't leave me alone after that. I moved to different places, and he would come into my place of employment. I worked at a fast food place in town, and I don't know what was more disturbing to me, whether he would get in my line and I would have to wait on him, or that he would get in the new young girl's line and I'd watch the way he looked at her and think, this guy's a serial rapist. He's done this before. He would drive by my place of work at night, and I just always had to be careful and always had to watch my back. And so my trust issues were so off the chart. And I struggled with eating disorder anyway, and it kicked it into overdrive. And then I got to a point where, since I'd put myself in church since the age of 5, and I was raised in such a turmoil, so much, I don't know, addiction and everything that I was raised in, it just made it to where I had a hard time functioning. And I kind of went through probably what was my first mental breakdown in life. I completely shut down. I thought God had left me. And I thought, how could he allow all these bad things to continue to happen to me? That how could, what did I deserve? How did I deserve any of this? I must be a bad person. So I ended up shutting down, and it made dating really hard because I don't think you'd even call it dating. I could be with somebody, but then I would have flashbacks and couldn't tell them that I was having flashbacks of bad things happening to me. But then I didn't want to be with the person again. So for a long time, it ended up being that I could be with somebody and then I would shut down and move on. So then you learn a hard identity of who you are, because you want to be able to associate sex with pleasure, and that it's meant to happen. It was designed by God for our bodies to be able to experience good. And we shouldn't have to experience bad things to our body. So it made it such a, you could have several triggers that would happen, and it was no guy that I dated's fault, but I ended up not being able to function, and I starved myself. I couldn't eat. Whenever I go through anything traumatic in life, I shut down, and got to a point where my electrolytes shut down, and I ended up in a rehab center when I was 24 years old, and it was for eating disorder. I had got to a point where I starved myself, and I'd always had trouble with my colon working properly. So I took laxatives to try to keep it going, and 2 didn't work and 4 didn't, and I ended up taking 16 laxatives a day and then couldn't eat because I was so sick to my stomach. So I ended up in the treatment center for the eating disorder, and the more they dug into different things that had happened to me in life, it came out about me being raped because they promised that they wouldn't tell, and I felt like it was a safe place for me. And so I shared all that information and what happened with the guy when I was in elementary school with the bib overhauls and the winter coat that I lost. And they suggested that I go to a group, a 12-step program called SA, which was Sex Addiction Anonymous. And I couldn't understand. I didn't feel like I was a sex addict. I didn't feel like I was having sex because I wanted it. That made it almost sound like I was a nymphomaniac, right? And I wasn't a nymphomaniac. It actually was something that could trigger good feelings for me or bad feelings for me.